Today we're soft launching a new series. This series is called Practicing the Way. Put our title slide up here. Subtitle today is An Invitation to the Weary. And so this week, while preparing, I was reminded of a movie that I first watched about 20 years ago. I think this movie's from 2004. And it was one scene in particular that was just kind of etched into my mind. Like, it's one that I remember, and I've gone back to that scene in my mind. And I actually went back and rewatched the whole movie this week to see if that scene really was the way I remembered it. And so the movie's called Spanglish. It's an Adam Sandler, Téa Leoni movie. Some of you've seen it. I really wish that I could show the clip that I was remembering this week. I can't do that because when we stream things like that, it just gets flagged and taken down. It takes down the whole stream. So I can't show it, but I can narrate it with a few stills. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do that with a caveat. Me talking about this scene is not a wholesale endorsement for the whole movie. It is a PG-13 movie, and I rewatched it this week, and it has a few scenes. And so, viewer discretion is advised. I'm just talking about one scene in particular, okay? So meet Bernice. This is Bernice. She is a sweet girl dealing with pretty typical teenage stuff. She's struggling with some of her classes at school. She's struggling with just the innate awkwardness of the age that she's in. But really her biggest struggle is with her mom. Okay, that's not her mom in the picture, the woman with her back to us. Let's go back. The woman in the first picture here, that's actually somebody who is brand new within this family, within their household. That's their new maid. She's a stranger to them. Her name is Flor. And she's just entered their lives. Flor is Mexican and speaks Spanish, but very, very little English. And she's new. So this is Bernice's mom. Actually, this is Deborah. And what can I say about Deborah? Deborah's a lot. Deborah is incredibly driven. She's extremely image conscious. She was kind of a very type A personality in a way that's manic, borderline neurotic. Maybe not borderline, maybe just neurotic. She's a perfectionist who's very hard on herself. And in addition to that, she's severely critical of other people, her family members specifically. This picture's from right here. This is from one of Deborah's first scenes with Bernice. And Deborah has just returned from her morning run. And Deborah, by the way, does not jog, she runs. She runs to punish herself. She runs to beat other people. And this particular morning, she gets back from her morning run, and Bernice is making breakfast, and her mom, Deborah, stops to sample what Bernice is making, and she declares two things. First, she basically says, "This is amazing. This is delicious. This is wonderful." And you just see Bernice begin to light up. And then she says, "And you could probably do without it." And you just see Bernice deflate. That one scene tells you everything about how Bernice feels under the critical eye of her mother. But things seem to take a positive turn when Deborah comes home from an afternoon of shopping. She surprises Bernice with a new outfit and then a whole bag full of other clothes. And so a delighted Bernice begins trying on those clothes. And as she's doing, she asks this heartbreaking question that it's almost a throwaway, like you almost miss it, but it's so powerful. She says, as she's opening everything, and she says, "What did I do right?" Which is just, what a crushing way to live, right? Unfortunately, as she's opening everything, her joyful anticipation quickly becomes humiliation when she realizes that the new outfit doesn't fit her. It's too small. It's not her size. And not only the one outfit, but all the clothes are too small for Bernice to wear. And pretty quickly, it becomes clear that her mother has deliberately bought everything for a smaller version of Bernice. And Deborah, the mom, she explains her gift, she probably put gift in quotes there. She explains the gift by saying, you're going to do it. You're going to lose that weight, and then you'll be beautiful. As if she's not beautiful as she is, right? Bernice is, of course, crushed and devastated that she can't live up to her mom's exacting standards. She asks everyone to leave her alone, and she cries herself to sleep that night. But the next morning, she's awakened by Flor, the new maid. And Flor comes into her room, wakes her up, and she picks up the discarded outfit that's lying on the floor. And then she holds it out for Bernice. And Flor uses the very first English sentence she's used with them, one that she actually just learned this English phrase the night before for this specific moment. She's holding out the outfit. She says, just try it on. And Bernice wants nothing to do with that. She protests because she doesn't want to replay the shame and the humiliation of the previous day. And this is what she says to Flor. She says, it doesn't fit me. It's too small. I'm too big. And Flor kindly insists with her newly learned English phrase, just try it on. Just try it on. So eventually Bernice concedes and she tries it on. And then she discovers that something's different. It fits, she declares in delight. Only later does she realize that Flor has made some alterations in the middle of the night. So that the outfit that previously spoke shame, that told her that she wasn't measuring up, that she wasn't acceptable or beautiful, that she was too big, that outfit is now truly a gift. The gift that it should have been in the first place. Just try it on. So come back to our title slide. Today we're going to hear an invitation from Jesus. And today I want to say this. This is not a standalone message. If you're here as a guest or you're joining us online as a guest, today will be helpful, but really, I hope it's helpful. But really today is a lead in to the next 12 weeks. It's really into who we are as a church and who we're called to be. But specifically, there's an invitation about what we're going to be doing together, a path we're going to be walking together for the next 12 weeks as followers of Jesus. It's going to be in our Sunday gatherings. It's going to be through our daily devotions that Pastor Mike creates for us. Those two things go together. If you don't know that, our daily devotions, you can find them on that same link tree that we talked about earlier. You can get there from your tap disc. Our daily devotions, they pair with our Sundays, and they're designed to prepare us for the coming Sunday. So that's going to be going on. Some of the life groups are going to be in discussion about that. I think that's going to be really helpful this quarter. But today we're hearing an invitation from Jesus, and it's one that comes with a promise that is saturated by kindness and not by criticism. Jesus isn't coming to critique. He's not coming with harshness, with saying, just do all these things and then you'll be beautiful, then you'll be loving. He's actually coming with an invitation to say, come follow me. I have good things for you. The win for us today is if we hear Jesus' invitation and we make a decision that we're going to, wherever we are today, we're going to just try it on. There's some things we're going to talk about that a lot of us have not experienced, and maybe we have tried it and have walked away and said, that's not for me. And the invitation is, would you try it again? Would you just try it on and see if Jesus hasn't made some alterations in what we're supposed to experience. So the thing that was supposed to be a gift in the first place truly is the gift that God always intended for it. So, to do that, I would say this, we're going to likely have to take ownership of any resistance that we personally experience towards Jesus. Resistance about who he is. Resistance about what we may have experienced before regarding his invitation. And then we're going to choose whether to listen and respond. So we're going to be in Matthew 11 today. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the context, but I'll give you two things. Here's the context of Matthew 11. We're going to be in verses 25 through 30. This passage begins with Jesus praying upwards, okay? Oftentimes, Jesus prayed with his eyes open. A lot of times the Gospels will tell us that looking up into heavens, Jesus, so he prayed with his eyes open. He wasn't a all eyes closed guy. He often prayed looking up into heaven, and then sometimes he would bring his gaze down to address the people he was speaking to. And that's exactly what happens in this one. He's going to start by praying to the Heavenly Father, but beginning in verse 27, he's going to lower his gaze to address the gathered crowd. And here's who he's talking to. This is really important. He's talking to a crowd. Now, in Jesus' teaching, sometimes he's talking with disciples. Those are the people that have already committed to walking with him, learning from him, doing what he did. Sometimes the things that we read in Scripture, the red letters, sometimes those are specifically spoken to disciples. This time he's speaking to a crowd. Anyone in earshot of what he's about to say. And so that's telling about who this invitation's for. Let's pick up in 11:25. At that time, Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and learned. You've hidden them from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for this is what you were pleased to do. Now is when he lowers his eyes and talks to people. He says, all things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom he chooses to reveal him. Note, as he begins this, in this public prayer, that Jesus is drawing a distinction between two types of people. He calls them the wise and learned and the little children. And he's contrasting the two, and he's emphasizing that those who come as little children, those are the ones that are able to receive from him. Jesus has something good to offer, but not everybody can receive it. There's some that are so wise and so learned that they have nothing left to learn. They're not willing to take a posture of learning. They're not willing to be humble. Specifically, Jesus has come to show people what God the Father is really like, but not everyone is open, not everyone is teachable. And though Jesus has not yet given the invitation, there's kind of an implied question just with what's said right here. Listen to the implied question. If you were in that crowd, what might you be thinking? Listen, he says, all things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father. No one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Now, if you're in that crowd, what's the question you're asking? Am I one that you would choose to reveal the Father to? Am I one that gets to know what God the Father is really like? If this is part of your mission, is to come and make the invisible God visible, is that something I can learn? I think if you were standing in that crowd, you'd be asking that. Are you one that Jesus is choosing to reveal the Father to? This is what he goes on to say, because this answers that question. Come to me, all. Yes, it's you. All who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, my burden is light. As if to answer the question of those in the crowd wondering if they were chosen by Jesus, he throws the invitation open to everyone listening. And he zeroes in on anyone who's weary of what has been and who's ready for something different. Anybody whose life has taught them that life is harsh, that they're not acceptable, that they can't do it, that they're not good enough, they're too big, they're too this, they're too that. He says, come to me and I will give you rest. And he describes it as something deeper than just relaxing. He said it's rest for your very souls. He unpacks that one invitation. If we look closely, there's actually three instructions, three waves of movement that are carried there. Let's look at those. Verse 11, 28 through 30, I just emphasize these. He says, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. for I'm gentle and humble in heart. You will find rest for your souls. Those three movements represent an invitation to become Jesus' disciples. Within church world, authors, speakers, a lot of pastors and Christian writers, thinkers have shifted from using the word discipleship to using the word apprentices, because discipleship doesn't have a whole lot of meaning to us outside of a church environment. But apprentices, well, we have a framework for what that means. When I first was at this church, I came as a young single guy. I was apprenticed as a baker at a bakery. I had never baked bread before. A friend of mine was leaving for college and had a great job and said, I think you could do the job that I do. Do you want to come learn? I met with his boss, and his boss said she would hire me. And so I went and I learned how to make bread. But I was an apprentice where for the first time that I came and watched, I literally just watched him make bread from start to finish. The rolling out the dough, portioning it, putting it in a baguette, slicing it, putting it in the oven, pulling it out. Like, I just watched him do the whole thing. And I spent the next several weeks with him every night, all night. This is the graveyard shift. Watching, learning, and then after a while, he let me start to do it. I got to practice those slits on the bread. I can still do those like with amazing accuracy. Like, I could never go into surgery because I would just cut everybody the same way, just 4 slices across the top. But over time, I learned, when I first got there and I rolled out a baguette, it looked like it was like all distorted, and it wasn't good. But over time, I learned how to make a baguette. And I learned how to slice it, how to bake it, and when to put it in the oven and when to pull it out. It took time, but I learned, and eventually I could do what my friend had done. I actually did it better than he did. Doesn't usually happen. Usually when the student is fully matured, they're like their rabbi. But I was just sort of really good, so. Actually, it was supposed to be handmade bread, like this was a little Italian bakery downtown. Some of you might remember Christina's Bakery. Wonderful little bakery downtown. One time my boss pulled me aside, and he came in and he inspected all my bread. I would make about 120 baguettes every night, and he inspected all my bread, and he looked at me when he got done, and he's like, it's supposed to be handmade. Meaning, this looks so perfect, it looks like a machine made them all. That's the implication. So, anyway, that's a long aside. The point is, I had to apprentice. I had to spend time. I had to learn how to do what he did, and then I had to do it. And then from then on, it was up to me to do. This thing that Jesus is doing here, he's inviting people to be a disciple or to be an apprentice. That was a known thing in their day. Here's what's different about when Jesus gave that invitation to come and be his disciple. When he says, come to me all who are weary, learn from me, take my yoke. That's the language of come be my disciple. But in their day, and that was a thing that rabbis did. That was a known thing. Rabbis came and got disciples. But what Jesus is doing differently is every other rabbi, when they invited disciples, they invited the best of the best, the cream of the crop, the top of the class. They invited people who they knew were just going to crush it. And Jesus comes to this crowd and he says, all of you can come be my disciple. All of you can come and learn from me, right? What Jesus offers is something he describes as rest for your souls. So disciples or apprentices in Jesus' day, in the words of John Mark Comer, they had 3 driving goals. And they're all represented right there in those 3 things that Jesus says. They were to be with their rabbi, they were to become like their rabbi, and they were to do as their rabbi did. That's kind of what I just described with apprentices as well, right? Those 3 rhythms are all embedded in there. Jesus says, come to me, take my yoke, learn from me. That word yoke, again, that's a word that maybe a lot of us aren't familiar with. It's actually a word that was common in their day, but it was borrowed from the agricultural It's like an agricultural metaphor they borrowed. A yoke was something that you would put on two beasts of burden, like two ox, and it would allow the two to do something to lift more weight, to do more work than they could do individually. And not just as like the sum of two, but like synergistically more. And so it was a way that you could do more than you could possibly do by being yoked to another. But also it was a way that a young ox learned how to do the work it was supposed to do. It was yoked to an older ox that was experienced, kind of like me with the bread, right? And so Jesus says, come take my yoke. And by Jesus' day, when people referred to their yoke, when you talked about a rabbi's yoke, it was his whole system of teaching. Jesus says, the things that I will teach you, the things I'll ask of you, my yoke is easy. Now, the crowd he's saying that to, they had some resistance because of what they'd already experienced it from their current religious leaders and from their world experience. We'll see that in a minute. But this is Jesus just smiling at the crowd, and he's saying, whatever resistance you might feel, maybe you don't think you're smart enough, maybe you don't think you're good enough, maybe you tried and failed, maybe you think that the outcome is harsh, just try it on. Come to me. Here's my yoke. Just try it on, right? Jesus knows their past experience of religion may have made them wary. So he saturates the invitation with promises. So we're going to read through that passage one more time. This time I've highlighted the promises, and listen to what he's assuring them of. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. Just try it on. In a moment, I'll share with you some specifics about the path we're going to be walking together on Sundays. But first, there's just something I want to clarify. Because we've heard Jesus' invitation and his promises, but my question is, have we heard it the way he intended it? Because with the way the gospel has been presented in the 20th and 21st century, especially in the Western world, the way the gospel's been presented, I don't know that we've understood what Jesus' invitation was. Because there's a popular understanding that what Jesus came to do was to make believers. Put your faith in me, just put your belief in me, and that's all. It's like we've reduced the gospel down to this simplistic thing. Say you believe, make this mental acknowledgement of faith in Jesus, and then you're covered. You go to heaven when you die. And the question is, when Jesus gave that invitation to come be his disciples, is that what he had in mind? Listening to his invitation, it's not just to believe in him, it's to be with him, to become like him, to learn to do what he did. Or to put it another way, Jesus didn't invite people to become believers, he invited them to become followers. Jesus didn't come to make Christians, he came to make apprentices, disciples. That promise to find rest for your souls, it's rooted in reordering our lives like a disciple would when they began to follow a rabbi. They reorganized and reoriented their lives to say, I'm going to follow you. And whatever I have to change in order to follow you and to take your yoke on, to learn from you, to do what you do, I'm willing to change that because the value of what I'm getting. And Jesus says, are you willing to make changes? Not just say a prayer and then continue on our lives as we did before. Maybe mixing in a Sunday service here and there, maybe playing a worship song in the car. It's coming to him with our whole life and with a willingness to change, to reorder everything under his lordship, with an expectation that his ways will be good. Again, that's a path that every one of us is invited to tread from wherever we are right now. So here's the thing. You may not even be walking with Jesus yet. You may be here because you're spiritually curious and you're hopeful that there's answers, that like if there's a God who offers the rest to the weary, that you need that. And maybe you're just considering beginning this journey. Maybe you've been on this journey for decades. Wherever we are, there's an invitation to go deeper, to go further, right? I phrased it this way, it's a greater integration of our whole life. Sometimes our lives are very compartmentalized. We have our spiritual life and our rest of our lives. We have this room in our heart that is, for Jesus on Sundays, and then we have the rest, and we don't really want him to go in those other rooms. Jesus' invitation is to whole life, holistic integration. Everything. Bring your whole life, become his apprentice, and learn from him. So that is the path that we are on as a church. Specifically, over the next several weeks, we're going to be listening to Jesus on two specific topics. The next 4 weeks, we're going to be exploring Jesus' promise of rest, specifically related to his practice of the Sabbath. So here's why. You go back to the context. I talked about what was happening in this passage. Well, I didn't talk about what came after it. What immediately follows this invitation from Jesus is, this is the way that Matthew organized the gospel, and he put this content there deliberately. What immediately follows Jesus' invitation to an easy yoke will be two occasions on which the Pharisees criticized Jesus for the way that he and his disciples were practicing the Sabbath. The Pharisees were like Bernice's mom. You're not doing it right. They were critical, they were harsh, they had ideas about what it should look like to practice the Sabbath. And Jesus comes and he offers that word rest, it's connected to the word Sabbath, which is why Matthew puts it where he does. But here's the thing. The way Jesus and his disciples practiced Sabbath, it didn't fit into their idea, but Jesus still didn't throw it out. Religion apart from relational obedience to God goes to seed pretty quickly. That's what happened with their practice of the Sabbath. But Jesus' response is not to throw out the practice of the Sabbath that had been given way back in Genesis and in Exodus. He doesn't throw it out. He just reorganizes. He says, come and learn from me. Come and learn what it's like to really Sabbath, to really rest. It's a practice that the Western church has largely thrown out, although many within Western church have begun to recognize it's to our detriment that we've gotten rid of Sabbath, and we need to relearn it. We need to come back and learn how to do it. And so we're going to spend the next 4 weeks doing a deep dive on Sabbath with the hope that we're not going to get it perfectly, and Jesus doesn't expect us to get it perfectly. The invitation is not, hey, come and get this right, and then you'll feel good about yourself and you'll be beautiful. It's come, just try it on and see if it doesn't bring the rest of your soul that you really need. I've been trying to practice Sabbath for the last couple of years since I took a sabbatical. I recognized that my sabbatical was basically an extended Sabbath, but that in order for me to continue in all the goodness that God did in me during a 3-month sabbatical I took in 2022, if I was going to really benefit from that, I had to incorporate a more weekly rhythm of that into my life. I couldn't wait and then take 3 months off in 7 years. And in my case, my first sabbatical was after like 16 years of ministry. I was beyond needing it. But I recognized I needed a weekly Sabbath. And I remember coming back and saying, I think we need to learn how to do this, but I'm not ready to talk about it because I don't really know how to do it myself yet. So let me master it, and then I'll come back and talk to you about it. Okay, I haven't mastered it. I am a learner trying to apprentice myself to Jesus. And I'm doing better at it. Andrea and I, we're doing better at it than we were 2 years ago, but there's still a lot for us to learn, and we don't always get it right. And so this is not an invitation to perfectionism. It's an invitation to say, what if the way our culture is doing life isn't what Jesus intended? It's not what God created. And what if we did it his way? What might we learn? So I don't know what resistance you might have to Sabbath. Some of you already have a practice of Sabbath that far exceeds anything that I've experienced. But many of us don't. Many of us just don't have any rhythm in our life where we just experience God's rest. And there's an invitation for us to learn, wherever we're at, to learn. I'm going to play a quick Bible project video that gives an overview to Sabbath more beautifully and simplistically and comprehensively than I ever could. So let me give you that, and then we'll close.
The number 7 is a big deal in the Bible.
Yeah, in biblical Hebrew, the word 7 is connected to the idea of fullness or completeness.
And that's something we all long for, but don't often experience. Instead, we find ourselves working endlessly, fighting back chaos with no real rest.
Yes. Now keep all that in mind as we turn to Genesis 1 in the Bible. It begins with darkness and disorder, but then God speaks to bring about light and order so that life can flourish.
And this happens over the course of 6 days.
Each day is marked with the phrase, "There was evening and there was morning." But on the 7th day, something special happens.
God stops and rests.
Right. Creation is brought to its completion on the 7th day. And that phrase, "there was evening and there was morning," it doesn't appear on day 7.
It's like a day with no end.
On the 7th day, God's presence fills his creation. The land provides for all of God's creatures, including humans, who are appointed to rule the world with God forever.
Kings and queens of the 7th day rest. I can get into that.
But the humans are deceived by a dark power, and they forfeit that rest. They're exiled into the wilderness, where they have to work as slaves to the land.
Until they die and return to the dust from which they came.
But God wants to restore humanity back to that 7th day rest. So he chooses to give the family of Israel that experience of ultimate rest so they can share it with others.
But how? They're in Egypt, slaves to an oppressive empire who's grinding them into the dust.
So God confronts Egypt and he liberates the Israelites, taking them through the darkness and chaos on the way to the promised land.
Now, while they're on their way, they find themselves in the wilderness. It's easy to get lost. Life is a struggle. They're not in the land of rest yet.
But while they're on the way, God invites them in the wilderness to start living as if they're in the promised land.
But how do you practice the future rest in the wilderness?
Well, God tells them that every 7th day they are to stop their work, or in Hebrew, to Shabbat, so that they can rest and enjoy God's good world.
So take a whole day to live as if the ultimate rest has already come.
Yeah, this is the Sabbath, celebrated every week on the 7th day. But there's more. The Sabbath is just one of 7 festivals that Israel practiced every year, each one anticipating that 7th day rest.
That is a lot of 7s.
And there's even more. Every 7 years, the Israelites were to liberate slaves, forgive debts, and let the land rest for a whole year. And then, every 7 times 7 years was the ultimate 7th day rest, called the year of Jubilee. If anyone had lost their land or gone into debt, all was forgiven, everything restored.
Wow, so the Sabbath, these feasts, the year of Jubilee, it's all pointing towards the hope of future rest.
Right. Now, when the Israelites went into the land, they forgot their God, and so they forfeited their chance for rest in the promised land.
They're exiled and enslaved again by an oppressive nation, led back into a world of chaos and disorder.
But Israel's prophets said that their exile would end one day, and that the ultimate jubilee of freedom and rest would come, but generations go by, and they're still waiting.
It's at this dark point in the story that Jesus appears, and he launches his public mission on a Sabbath day.
Yeah, he read aloud from the scroll of Isaiah, saying that it was time for all captives and slaves to be released because this was the year of the Lord's favor.
What did he mean, this is the year of the Lord's favor?
He was talking about the ultimate jubilee.
So Jesus is claiming that 7th day rest would come through him.
Right, he said that he was the Lord of the Sabbath, and he confronted disorder and darkness in all of its forms, liberating people from sickness, sin, even from death itself.
Yet, Jesus was killed, so even his work was undone.
Well, it seemed that way. But notice, Jesus timed his death to take place at the end of the week. His body rested in a tomb during the Sabbath, and on the 8th day, he rose from the dead.
Oh wait, the 8th day? You mean the first day of a new week?
Exactly. Jesus' resurrection was like the first day of a new creation, where God's light and life broke into the darkness.
So because of the resurrection, we have hope in God's promise of future rest. But we're not there yet. It's like we're still in the wilderness, where we experience struggle and pain.
But as we journey towards that ultimate seventh day, Jesus invites us to experience a taste of real rest now by following him. Or in his words, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest."
You know, Jesus' invitation, it's much more comprehensive than just a seventh day practice of Sabbath or rest. But that's one of the ways that we grow in it. It's one of the things that Jesus did. He didn't throw it out just because the Pharisees had turned it into something that was legalistic and crushing. He actually redeemed it. And so that's something that we're going to be looking at this next 4 weeks. The following 8 weeks leading up to Easter, we're going to be listening to Jesus' words from the Sermon on the Mount. And we're going to just open our hearts and our ears and our lives to what Jesus would speak to us. We might call it red letter Christianity, where we're just allowing Jesus to speak to us. So that's what's coming. But here's the question. And I think each one of us has to decide this on the front. And I love the way they phrased it. I didn't write it down, but they basically said something to the effect of taking one day a week to live as if the eternal rest has already come, right? Taking one day a week in faith and in obedience and discovering what it might create for our souls. So, but the question is what might keep you? Do you have any resistance to reorganizing your life? Because we can't simply add something, we'll have to take something away, right? And are you willing to consider that? Maybe it's fear. Do you worry that you'd have to sacrifice too much? That's a typical reason we don't want to follow Jesus, is we think that it might cost us more than we gain. Maybe it's control. Maybe we don't want to surrender control of a particular aspect of our lives to another. That's part of the human condition. Maybe it's busyness. We simply don't have any time to pause and stop and slow down. Maybe it's our past experience. Maybe you've tried to observe the Sabbath in some way and it just became a legalism that wasn't life-giving. Or maybe it's an issue of trust. Maybe it's that you're wondering if God's motives are really good. Is Jesus' yoke really easy and light? So here's how we're going to close today. I'm just going to put that scripture up one more time. This time this is in Eugene Peterson's The Message translation. I'm just going to read it and then just give you a moment to decide. Do you want to walk this path? I think that we can do this more effectively by doing it together than a bunch of people doing it alone. Because I think one of the things that we'll discover over the next 4 weeks is ways that we corporately actually don't live in a way that creates Sabbath. And maybe there's things that we need to address in our corporate rhythms. And so we're going to be looking at all that. But it starts with each one of us making a personal decision about how we will hear that invitation from Jesus, specifically as it relates to this. He says, are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Come, Holy Spirit, will you search us and know us? And whatever you see in each one of us, anything that's limiting us from the fullness of life that you came to give, anything that's limiting us from following you and learning how to do life the way you would intend, would you lay your finger on that and help us to be able, give us the grace to recognize that? Would you give us the courage to trust you, to step out and to just try it on? Jesus, would you be our ever-present teacher? Holy Spirit, you are our ever-present teacher. May these next 12 weeks be consecrated to your voice and to your intentions. Would you breathe creativity upon us that each one of us would discover ways that we can reorganize our lives to greater experience life with you in the way you intended?